Welcome to this evening's Holocaust Memorial commemoration at IMMA venues. A few housekeeping announcements. In the event of an emergency, please note the emergency exits which are clearly marked. Please make sure your mobile phones and all electronic devices are fully switched off. In the event of a fire, you will be directed to the fire assembly points. Please take a moment to ascertain the exits near to you. The toilets are through the doors at the back of the hall. Thank you for your attention. This evening's Holocaust Memorial Day commemoration is being live streamed. Our youth readers are winners of the Mary Elms Prize in Holocaust Studies. Every year, on this evening of commemoration, we solemnly mark Holocaust Memorial Day here in Dublin. It is more than 80 years since the end of the Second World War, when the horrors of the Holocaust were revealed. We remember 6 million Jewish people who were murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators. And we remember millions of other persecuted minorities who were victims of Nazi atrocities. This evening's ceremony provides us with the opportunity to cherish the memory of all those who perished and to reflect on the consequences of the Holocaust. I invite the Lord Mayor of Dublin, Councillor Ray McAdam, to address us.
On behalf of the City and people of Dublin, it is a great honour to host this National Holocaust Memorial Day commemoration, an important national occasion that is held each year here in our capital. We are deeply privileged to be here in the presence of Holocaust survivors and the descendants of survivors who have made Dublin and Ireland their home. We also extend a warm welcome to representatives of all the victims groups who live among us here in Ireland and whose communities carry the scars of persecution, loss and displacement. Holocaust Memorial Day marks the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau on January 27, 1945. Today, we recall, with solemnity and sorrow, the suffering inflicted on the Jewish people of Europe and on so many others who were persecuted and murdered during the Holocaust. People targeted because of their faith, their ethnicity, their disability, their identity, their political beliefs, or simply because they were deemed other. We remember the dead, we honour the living, and we acknowledge with humility the burden carried by survivors and their families, the weight of memory, and the courage it takes to speak, to return, to bear witness. We also reflect on the suffering still being inflicted on people throughout the world today, and we recognise in that reflection our responsibility to resist hatred and prejudice in all their forms, to challenge anti-Semitism and racism wherever they appear, and to uphold the dignity of every person. I wish to acknowledge the vital work of Holocaust Education Ireland. Their endeavours to educate and inform are essential in ensuring that the Holocaust is never denied, never distorted, and never forgotten. May remembrance deepen our humanity, and may our words be matched by our actions.
Chairperson of Holocaust Education Ireland, to introduce this evening of remembrance.
The Holocaust has a diaspora that reaches far beyond the infamous sites where it occurred. In fact, thousands of survivors and their descendants live in many different countries around the world, a handful of whom came here to Ireland. While they began life here as immigrants, through time and generational change, they've become Irish. Through education, Holocaust Education Ireland refutes distortion and denial of the Holocaust and its consequences. We provide historically accurate and irrefutable information. We aim to challenge anti-Semitism and all forms of racism and discrimination, encouraging acceptance and respect for all people, fostering a diverse, inclusive and equal society. With few Holocaust survivors left to carry the burden of memory, the lessons of history grow dangerously dim. It becomes even more important to educate generations now living. We urge young people in our midst to speak out against the scourge of disinformation, prejudice and hatred, so that they might learn lessons from the past that are relevant to their lives today.
I invite An Taoiseach Micheál Martin to address us.
Lord Mayor of Dublin, Councillor Ray McAdam, Taoiseach Simon Harris and Minister for Justice Jim O'Callaghan, Chief Rabbi Yanni Weiner, and of course Holocaust survivor Susie Diamond, Professor Thomas O'Dowd, Chairperson of Holocaust Education Ireland. Agus gwynúsle galéir is cúis fór onóra dom, a bheith I láthar an seo, in bhór jauntar, lá cuine cháin an ila lusca. Agus is ócáid an háchtach agus mothúcánach I seo don phobal Júdach fud na tíre. An lá dhéana míad comóra Sarah Auschwitz I mí an áir 1945. Agus thar éon rud eile is smáil gan a lehéad anam an duine an tuile lusca. Dá bhrí sin is searmanas anna suntasach é seo, mar go leannig sé de bheith ag spreagan an glúnta chun ard a chóirt an ré a chuig hart, agus gan an tuafás chéine a rinne, gan cinenne díthú, glanna etnach, agus na hasnamh bhrí réine is measa a dhéanamh chuige. Distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honour to have been invited here today to speak at Ireland's Holocaust Memorial Day. In particular, I am honoured to share the room with survivors of the Holocaust and their families, including those who sadly left us this year. It would be remiss of me not to recall and pay tribute in particular to the late Joe Weselski, who recently passed away as Ireland's oldest man. A resistance fighter and Holocaust survivor, Joe brought his story of survival and heroism to Ireland, where, in his new life, in his adopted homeland, he continued to contribute in so many ways to our society, including as a committed supporter and attendee at this national commemoration event until very recently. This is a very important and emotional afternoon for our Jewish community in Ireland. We unite to remember the 6 million Jews who were persecuted and murdered, and the millions of other victims targeted on the basis of their ethnicity, disability, sexual orientation, or political and religious beliefs. By the end of the Second World War, most of Europe's Jewish communities had been decimated, and a great number of Jewish communities in Eastern Europe and parts of the Balkans had been utterly devastated. An estimated 2/3 of all of Europe's Jews were killed in a program of systematic and industrialized murder, the aim of which was their total elimination. As I referenced in my opening, a year ago I had the honour of spending International Holocaust Remembrance Day at Auschwitz-Birkenau, where we marked the 80th anniversary of its liberation. The feeling of grief and desolation that permeates that place is very real, and I carry it with me. The shocking atrocities and cruelty perpetrated during those darkest of times inflicted profound intergenerational wounds that go to the very heart of the Jewish community today. So many innocent men, women, and children had their right to life, dignity, and liberty taken from them. And we as a global society were denied the enriching influence of their talents, their gifts, and their inspiration. The sheer scale of the cruelty, the inhumanity, the devastation remains almost impossible to comprehend, and the passing of time has not dimmed the horror. But we must always be careful that incomprehension does not lead to inattention, because inattention allows bad seeds to grow. Inattention allows hate and prejudice to insinuate themselves into public and private discourse. We are reminded of Hannah Arendt's oft-quoted phrase about the banality of evil. We must reflect on her words when she talked about the strange interdependence between thoughtlessness and evil. And that is why we must always remain mindful. We must always remain vigilant. In this context, I want to pay tribute to the work of the Claims Conference, the international organisation helping Holocaust survivors and working to ensure the crimes of the Holocaust are remembered and taught, who just this week published the results of their first survey on attitudes towards the Holocaust in our country. There is some very sobering reading in that work. Most starkly, a finding that almost 10% of Irish people aged 18 to 29 believe the Holocaust is a myth, while almost 20% of the same age cohort believe that it happened, but that its scale has been, quote, greatly exaggerated. The Holocaust is the most clearly documented crime in world history. Its savagery and scale are undeniable, as are the identities of its victims. This level of ignorance and denial is shocking and must be opposed and dealt with. Within this, we must all understand that the foundation of the Holocaust was anti-Semitism. While not all anti-Semites supported it, it would have been impossible without the corrosive evil of this deep prejudice. Every decent person should be appalled at the levels of anti-Semitism which still exist. We should be outraged at the need to provide protection for Jewish places of worship. It is the duty of every person who believes in basic human dignity to call out anti-Semitism wherever they find it, and that includes our society. The level of Holocaust denial and distortion revealed is not unique to Ireland, but it is a very clear reminder of the critical importance of your work in Holocaust Education Ireland and the need for all of us to do more in terms of education and public awareness. And it's also a reminder, as I've said, of the importance of pursuing a zero-tolerance approach to anti-Semitism. The more encouraging news from this research is that 92% of those surveyed believe that it is important to continue teaching people about the Holocaust. In me and in this government, you have a willing and eager partner in meeting this challenge and objective. Our Minister for Education, Hildegard Naughton, and her department are working with the Department of Foreign Affairs to develop an education programme with the Auschwitz-Birkenau Foundation. And the Claims Conference, along with the Jewish Representative Council of Ireland, has come forward with a very interesting proposal about giving schools access to survivors via video conference to discuss and to learn from their experiences, which I will also develop with our Minister for Education. We are living in increasingly unsettled times where post-World War II norms of behaviour and language are being constantly undermined. We are seeing growing instances of people feeling comfortable expressing anti-Semitism, racism, and intolerance. The Claims Conference research tells us that almost a third of Irish people have encountered Holocaust denial or distortion while on social media. We see language and an attendant hatred that continues to move people to violence and murder. I know I speak for everyone here today when I say that our hearts go out to the families of the victims of the atrocity in Sydney last December. A terrible reminder that such virulent hatred exists and can manifest itself in terrible violence and murder. And so as we remember the Holocaust today, we think too of those 15 people, including a Holocaust survivor, who were murdered celebrating Hanukkah. At the time of that atrocity, I spoke about the feelings of vulnerability and isolation that an event like that could have on our own Jewish community, and made it clear in Dáil Éireann that our Jewish neighbours are an important and very valued part of our society. I stated clearly and unambiguously that there can be no place for anti-Semitism or anti-Semitic rhetoric in our country. I reiterate that message today. Sometimes, in the darkest acts, we can see the hopeful side of humanity. It is often said that for evil to exist, it requires good people to do nothing. In Sydney, we saw people refuse to do nothing. We saw people stand up to the attackers at great personal sacrifice, undoubtedly saving lives by their actions. We pay tribute to and take encouragement from that example of selflessness. Indeed, it serves as a stark reminder of the reason we gather every year at this event. It is to commemorate the victims of the Holocaust, but also to ensure that these unspeakable events are not allowed to fade with the passing of time. And that is why we are especially honoured that today, over 80 years after the Holocaust, we still have the privilege of interacting with survivors. And I would like to pay tribute to the fortitude and resilience of Susie Diamond and Tommy Reichenthal. And indeed, I heard Susie speak eloquently and movingly on the This Week programme at lunchtime. And we wish Tommy the very best also. And both of them have shared their experiences on a number of occasions with us. And we've all heard the harrowing stories that Tommy and Susie have to share. And in that act of sharing, they are providing an utterly essential service to their fellow human beings. Tommy and Susie, and Tommy's son David is with us this afternoon, just want to say to you both that we are profoundly grateful for your courage and for your generosity. You are an inspiration to current and to future generations. We've all a great deal to learn from your mission and your outlook. You are no less than living testaments to the strength and resilience of the human spirit, having never allowed the flame of hope go out. The candles that are lit today symbolize the unquenchable light that still resides within each of you 80 years on. It is a light that is also carried by the generations who succeeded victims of the Holocaust. Some of you here today are second, third, or fourth generation survivors, including from the Roma community. And I'm delighted that Karina Camarino, Nicholas Brown, Alexandra Pashkovska, Yoram Tucker, Chief Rabbi Yoni Vider, and Caroline and Molly Zinn Collis, and Monica Pashkovska, that all of you are here with us for this important occasion. And we stand in awe of each one of you, because collectively we salute your extraordinary fortitude and thank you for your commitment to promoting the peaceful and respectful coexistence of humankind. This ceremony reminds us of the dangers of prejudice and intolerance of others who don't share our beliefs or customs. Our generations owe it to those who died to ensure that we do all in our power to never allow the seeds of such hatred take root again. I'm acutely conscious that our Jewish community here in Ireland is experiencing a growing level of anti-Semitism. I know that elements of our public discourse has coarsened. I know that the proposed renaming of Herzog Park caused deep hurt. I condemned it at the time, and more recently when delivering a lecture on the work of the late Professor Dermot Keogh, exploring anti-Semitism in our country, I said that when a group of people decide that they will seek to rename the only public park in our capital city named after an Irish Jew without any consultation with the Jewish community, and when they then announce later that they will find a Jew they deem worthy enough to provide a new name, then frankly, the community has every right to be deeply concerned and to express that concern, because that behaviour is not acceptable. Our urgent challenge is to work to ensure that the public realm offers safe spaces where ideas can be shared and debated, and where differing views are tolerated with respect. As part of this work, our programme for government commits us to giving effect to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism, which I was pleased to formally adopt on behalf of the government in January 2025, and to implement the European Union Declaration on Fostering Jewish Life in Europe. Alongside this work, I am establishing a structured dialogue with faith and non-confessional groups to allow for open, respectful and dignified debate and discussion on issues of mutual interest and concern. I look forward to working collaboratively with you and your representatives on both fronts over the coming year. Bhfuil mo bhuíochas sa gabháilibh as an gcuireadh chun freastal agus láirta nuamh. Tá méid ile aontaithe in our níoreachtaí a chreisiú chun nach ligfar tú fás an ile losca a tharlú a rís go deo. Conclusion, I want to thank you again for inviting me to attend and speak today. It is vital that all of us actively remember the horror of the Holocaust and redouble our efforts to ensure that the anti-Semitism and racism that enabled it are never again allowed to take hold. Together, we remember.
The Stockholm Declaration 2000, of which Ireland is a signatory, is an international intergovernmental agreement between countries, committing them to commemorating and educating about the Holocaust. I invite Jim O'Callaghan, Minister for Justice, Home Affairs and Migration, to read an extract from that important document.
We, the governments attending the Stockholm International Forum on the Holocaust, recognise that it was a tragically defining episode of the 20th century, a crisis for Europe and a universal catastrophe. The unprecedented character of the Holocaust fundamentally challenged the foundations of civilization. After more than half a century, it remains an event close enough in time that survivors can still bear witness to the horrors that engulfed the Jewish people. The terrible suffering of millions of Jews and other victims of the Nazis has left an indelible stain across Europe that must forever be seared in our collective memory. The selfless sacrifices of those who defied the Nazis and sometimes gave their own lives to protect or rescue Holocaust victims must also be inscribed in our hearts. We pledge to strengthen our efforts to promote education, remembrance, and research about the Holocaust in our schools, universities, communities, and other institutions. With humanity still scarred by anti-Semitism, genocide, ethnic cleansing, racism, xenophobia, and other expressions of hatred, we commit to fight against these evils and to reaffirm our common aspiration for a democratic and tolerant society, free of prejudice and other forms of bigotry.
I invite Deirdre Niverin, barrister, to tell us about the challenges of anti-Semitism, racism, and hatred that we face today.
The Holocaust is an event that happened in the midst of societies resembling our own. It was mainly about Jews, but its lessons are universal. The intention was to erase an entire people from the history and memory of the world. The Holocaust did not begin with gas chambers and crematoria. It started with hate speech, name-calling, humiliation, bullying, segregation, and exclusion. It is about the destruction of the Jewish people of Europe by the Nazis and their collaborators, and also about the destruction of thousands of other minorities. Everything was planned, thought out, and organised. The existence of gas chambers was kept hidden like a state secret. It was the survivors themselves who first acknowledged their responsibility of passing on knowledge of the Holocaust and keeping its memory alive, something that has become increasingly difficult. Today, we are confronted by virulent anti-Semitism, racism, and hatred being fomented through social media and by physical attacks on non-white members of our populations. Many have lived amongst us harmoniously for generations, but suddenly find themselves, their compatriots, co-religionists, friends and family being abused and even attacked in the streets. Children are being intimidated in schools, immigrant centres are being set on fire, people have been murdered. The rise in the number of white supremacist and neo-Nazi movements is gaining traction around the world. Social media is providing a conduit for fomenting hate speech and vile images, providing platforms where extremist rhetoric becomes legitimate. The more this language is repeated and the more it seeps into the national discourse, the more it becomes acceptable and mainstreamed. Recalling the genocidal tragedy of the Holocaust in the last century leads us to address the challenges we face in the present one. Public declarations and acts of anti-Semitism and all forms of racism are still hateful, prejudiced, and wrong. They must be called out for what they are, whenever and wherever they are manifested.
A handful of Jewish Holocaust survivors live in Ireland. All of them were children during the Holocaust, and all of them found their way to Ireland by different means. Each of them lost many family members in the Shoah, and each has his or her own personal tale of survival. Tommy Reichenthal came to Ireland in 1959. For 50 years, he didn't speak about his experiences during the Holocaust. He just couldn't. I invite Tommy's son David to share his story with us.
I am here today not because of who I am, but because of what I am. I am a Jew and a Holocaust survivor. I was born in Slovakia in 1935. I was just 9 years old when I was captured by the Nazis, along with my mother, brother, grandmother, aunt, and cousin. We were herded into a cattle car, and from that moment onwards, we were treated worse than animals. There was no privacy or hygiene. The stench and conditions were unbearable. Eventually, after 7 nights, the cattle car stopped. The doors were opened, and we were greeted by shouts from the SS with guns pointing and barking dogs. We had arrived at our destination, Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. I was there from November 1944 until the liberation of the camp in April 1945. What I witnessed as a 9-year-old boy is impossible to describe. The starvation, the cruelty of the camp guards, the cold and disease. People who are just skin and bone and look like living skeletons were walking around very slowly, some of them dropping to the ground, never to get up again. They were dying in their hundreds, their emaciated bodies left where they fell or thrown onto heaps. In front of our barracks, there were piles of decomposing corpses. For many prisoners in Bergen-Belsen, the conditions were too much to bear, and they threw themselves on the barbed wire at night to be shot in order to be put out of their misery. We found their corpses there in the morning. 70,000 prisoners of Bergen-Belsen are buried there in mass graves. I lost 35 members of my family in the Holocaust.
The boycotts of Jewish businesses and professionals in April and May 1933 were soon followed by book burnings and discrimination against Jewish artists throughout Germany. Gradually, Jewish people were squeezed out of German society. I invite Fintan O'Toole to give his reading.
The Nazis put up posters in the windows of Jewish-owned businesses and professions, warning German citizens to defend themselves and not to patronize those premises. Jewish religious books, books about Jews, and books written by Jewish authors were burned in public bonfires along with other books by writers who the Nazis condemned as un-German. Book burnings took place throughout Germany, where some of the finest works of literature, history, philosophy, science, and art were all destroyed. This was intended to leave Jews and Germans bereft of learning about their culture, their history, and their heritage. Art created by Jewish artists was condemned as degenerate. Their paintings and artworks were ripped from public exhibitions and private homes, much of it destroyed. Jewish artists were ridiculed and beaten in public, and works of art owned by Jewish people were stolen by the Nazis. Jewish actors, film directors, and artists were no longer able to find work, and Jewish composers and musicians were dismissed from their employment. Very soon, Jews were not allowed in public places such as cafes, opera houses, cinemas, theatres, swimming pools, ice rinks, bookshops, or barbers. They could no longer sit on park benches which had "Not for Jews" stenciled on them. Jewish people were not allowed to ride on trams. There were Nazi police everywhere, preventing Jews from going wherever they had always been able to go.
The Nuremberg Laws of 1935 had profound impact for German Jews. I invite Mary Canning of the Royal Irish Academy to tell us about them.
The Nuremberg Laws were designed to make Jewish people disappear from German society. Jews were deprived of their German citizenship. Jewish people were prohibited from marrying or having relationships with non-Jewish Germans. This law was soon extended to include Roma, Black people, and other ethnic minorities. For the first time, Jews were defined as a race. As restrictions tightened, Jews found it increasingly difficult to earn a living. They were no longer able to work in the civil service, in academia, or in the media. Jewish businesses were appropriated by the Nazi state, and Jewish banks and bank accounts held by Jews were confiscated. The Nuremberg Laws disenfranchised Jews and deprived them of their civil rights and their human rights. Jewish people were desperate to leave Germany, to find somewhere safe.
By 1938, as pressure increased on Jews and other Germans to leave Germany and German-occupied lands, hundreds of thousands tried to flee. Anticipating a Jewish refugee crisis, President Roosevelt convened an international conference in Evian, France, to discuss offering refuge to Jewish people. I invite Klaus Unger, whose father fled Berlin and arrived in Ireland in 1939, to tell us about the Evian Conference.
32 countries were represented at the Evian conference, including Ireland. Delegates were asked if they would accept Jewish refugees. Most countries said that they had no room for Jews or that their quotas were already full. One country even stated, "No Jew is too many." With nowhere to turn, Jews found themselves trapped within their own borders. People are still fleeing discrimination, persecution, tyranny, and war, desperate to find refuge somewhere safe. These challenges are still impacting our world today.
The state-sanctioned violence of the November pogrom in 1938 marked a turning point in Nazi persecution of Jewish people. I invite Shona Coxon, Deputy Garda Commissioner, to give her reading.
The November pogrom, also known as Kristallnacht, erupted across Germany and Austria as the SS, Nazi police, Hitler Youth, and locals rampaged through the streets on that November night. Hundreds of synagogues, Jewish schools, and businesses were destroyed and set ablaze. Windows were smashed, leaving the streets strewn with glass. 91 Jews were beaten to death, and hundreds died later of their injuries. Some 30,000 Jewish men were thrown into concentration camps. Jewish cemeteries were desecrated, and thousands of apartments and shops belonging to Jewish people were looted. After the destruction, the Jewish communities were fined 1 billion Reichsmarks to pay for the damage. After years of official harassment of Jews in Nazi Germany, the state-sanctioned violence of Kristallnacht marked the acceleration of Jewish persecution that would ultimately culminate in the Holocaust.
I invite Mary Kenevick to tell us about the rules of identification imposed upon Jewish people by the Nazis. Youth reader Abby Sweeney will read from the diary of 15-year-old Yitzhak from Vilna.
The Nazis forced Jewish people to wear identifying badges, such as yellow stars of David, to be worn on their outer clothing, or white armbands with blue stars on them. Everyone in Germany is required to carry identity papers, but special identifying marks were added to those of Jewish people. A large red letter J was stamped on their passports, and the middle name Sarah for females and Israel for males were introduced. All of these measures enabled the Nazi police to easily identify Jews.
The decree was issued that the Vilna Jewish population must put on badges front and back. I was ashamed to appear on them on the street, not because it would be noticed that I'm a Jew, but because I was ashamed of what they were doing to us. I was ashamed of our helplessness.
more than 1,000 ghettos were created throughout Nazi-occupied Europe, usually in rundown areas of cities or large towns from where thousands would be deported to transit camps, concentration camps, slave labor camps, killing sites, or death camps. I invite Rachel Hickey to give her reading. Youth reader Rosalind Waghorn will read from the diary of 13-year-old Eva from Romania.
Jews, Roma, communist, homosexual, and political opponent of the regime were incarcerated in the Nazi ghettos, which were created in every country occupied by Germany. It is estimated that 1 million people died in them. Many ghettos were walled in or fenced off, and residents who left them without permission were severely punished, often shot. The brutality, harsh living conditions, starvation rations, and disease added to the death toll. It suited the Nazis if they could claim that people in the ghettos were dying from natural causes. The inhabitants of the ghettos, who came from all walks of life, soon realized that the ghetto served as a place to destroy them physically and psychologically, and their ultimate fate would be death. Although there are heroic stories of resistance, most of them failed. In the end, all of the ghettos created by Nazis were razed and their population murdered. There were few survivors.
We are here 5 days, but it seems like 5 years. First, the fence is finished, and nobody can go out or come in. And in every house, they've posted a notice which tells us exactly what we are allowed to do. Actually, everything is forbidden. But the most awful thing is that the punishment for everything is death. It doesn't actually say this punishment also applies to children, but I think it does apply too.
I invite Fergus O'Bara of the EU Parliament Liaison Office to tell us about Nazi camps and the killing units.
There were hundreds of concentration camps, slave labour camps, and transit camps within the Nazi camp system. They were run by the SS, and many also had several sub-camps. Hundreds of thousands of prisoners succumbed to brutality, starvation, cold, and disease in these places of incarceration. In June 1941, Germany swept into the Eastern Territories and Western Russia. The German army was followed by special killing units called Einsatzgruppen, tasked with killing Jews in all the towns and villages they passed through. The killing squads were comprised of Nazis, SS, police officers, members of the German army, and thousands of local collaborators. They rounded up Jews in shtetls, towns, and villages, forcing them into cemeteries, forests, and ravines, where they were murdered in their thousands at point-blank range. Many were forced
to dig mass graves before being shot into them. Entire Jewish communities, totaling some 1.5 million Jews, as well as thousands of other victims, were annihilated by this method of face-to-face killing.
Word reached Berlin that some members of the killing squads found their work distressing. They asked head office to find a more efficient way of murdering Jews. The Wannsee Conference was convened on the 20th of January, 1942. I invite Stephen Benedict, filmmaker, to tell us about the meeting.
Reinhard Heydrich, Chief of the Reich Security Main Office, summoned 15 delegates to a meeting in a lakeside villa at Wannsee, outside Berlin. He asked them to endorse Hitler's plans for the total annihilation of the Jewish people of Europe. Eichmann presented the delegates with a list of the number of Jews living in each European country who the Nazis intended to murder. Ireland appears on the list with a total of 4,000 Jews. The inclusion of Ireland on the Wannsee list has huge significance for the Irish Jewish community. Had the war taken a different course and the Nazis not been defeated? The delegates debated who was Jewish according to bloodline considerations and discussed evacuation and resettlement, euphemisms for murder. They concluded that a more efficient method of killing was possible, one that would produce little residue and spare those operating the killing sites the negative psychological trauma of face-to-face killing. In less than 2 hours, the delegates gave their unanimous support for the implementation of the final solution to the Jewish question, the establishment of death camps in which Jewish people and other victims will be murdered by poison gas.
I invite Liam Herrick to tell us about the Nazi death camps. Youth reader Esther Tyther will read from the memoir of Kitty Hart Moxon from Poland, who was 16 years old when she was imprisoned in Auschwitz-Birkenau. Today, she is 99 years of age and still speaks about her experiences.
6 death camps were created by the Nazis, all of them on Polish soil, where approximately 3 million Jews and thousands of other victims were murdered in gas chambers. Prisoners were selected for life or death. 90% were selected to die. They were ushered into undressing areas where they were told to leave their clothes neatly on the numbered pegs and to tie their shoes together to make them easier to find when they came back from the showers. They never came back. Their clothing, shoes, and personal belongings were sorted and sold in markets back in Germany. Human hair was used in the manufacture of textiles. This systematic industrial process of murder was unprecedented in human history.
As evening came, the whole sky was red. Smoke and flames were pouring out of all the chimneys. None of us slept that night. It was no longer possible to pretend, even to yourself, that the stories were not really true. All that we had heard and guessed was now before our eyes. Here were the death factories. Today, in 2026, it is barely credible to someone like myself, who lived through the worst of it, that members of a younger generation cannot believe it happened at all. But I did live through it, and I do know it happened. I was there.
The Holocaust was unprecedented in its planning, execution, and in its intent to destroy the entire Jewish people, their culture, and their history. I invite Carl Nelken to give his reading.
The final solution was the systematic intent by the Nazis and their collaborators to murder every Jew in every country of Europe, stretching as far north as Norway, as far south as Rhodes, as far east as Russia, and as far west as Ireland. They also include those Jews living in the countries of North Africa and Arab lands. 6 million Jews perished in the Holocaust. 1.5 million of those victims were children. The Nazis also murdered millions of other victims, but, as Elie Wiesel reminds us, it is true that not all victims were Jews, but all Jews were victims.
We shall now hear a Roma song called The Burning Barn. This song was created by a group of Polish Roma who were captured in a town by the Nazis. The Roma could not send messages to each other, but they knew other Roma were heading towards the town with their families. They created this song to warn them of the fate that awaited them if they entered the town. So they sang this song repeatedly as a warning. Through this song, many Roma lives were saved. I invite Monika Paskowska, a member of the Polish Roma community, to sing this poignant song. We must prevent future generations from thinking of the Holocaust in terms of anonymous, faceless numbers. Every victim has a name. Several people living in Ireland lost cherished family members in the Holocaust whose names we have included in the scroll of names. For some of them, we know their place of birth, their country of origin, their age, and their place of death. For others, we have only their names, and these are included in the scroll. In this small way, we honour their memory and give them a personal Irish memorial. I invite pupils from Stratford College, Dublin, Coláiste Kilmainham, Wicklow, Portlaoise College, County Laois, and New Park Comprehensive School, Blackrock, to read from the scroll of names.
Max Heller, Clara Heller, Gisela Molnar, Sander Molnar, Baila Hirschberg, Matthias Hirschberg, Ruchla Orzel, Feivel Orzel, Slajma Urbach, Hirsch Urbach, Tauba Urbach, David Joseph Urbach, Shaul Urbach, Abe Zvi Urbach, Gitla Freila Urbach,
Sarah Urbach,
Leah Fegla Urbach,
Giel Urbach,
Nuchim Mordechai
Shimon
Urbach,
Urbach,
Ruchla
Nachim
Golda
Urbach,
Urbach,
Fegla Urbach, Perla Urbach, Frimetta Urbach, Moses Klein, Hilda Frankel, Kurt Frankel, Walter Frankel, Herbert Frankel, Fritz Frankel, Zygmunt Frankel, Solomon Delmont,
Sally Wolf,
Caroline Wolf,
Henrietta
Martin Wolf, Wolfgang
Rosetta
Wolf,
Wolf, Ellie Velva Avisansky, David Philip, Reha Philip, Leopold Philip, Julia Philip, Dagbert Philip, Louis Philip, Valeria Philip, Rosalia Shamovitz, Julius Meyer, Geza Surrey, Oscar Shamovitz, Agnes Fried,
Adela Fried,
Ezenkiel Reichenthal,
Bella Fried,
Katarina Reichenthal,
Katarina Fried,
Kalamar Reichenthal, Alona Reichenthal, Gita Reichenthal, Ibi Reichenthal, Desider Reichenthal, Ferdinand Alt, Renka Alt, Erna Albert, Marta Albert, Josef Drexler, Bedrishka Drexler, Paul Drexler, Meta Drexler, Ella Perlberg, Irma
Angisha
Popper,
Mataya, Galma Rosenthal, Eleonora Rosenthal, Heinrich Heinbach, Selma Heinbach, Simcha Sachs, Rivka Sachs, Beryl Sachs, Zis Sachs, Nachman Sachs, Shanna Sachs, Aaron Sachs, Hannah Sherhai, Joel
Beetle
Sachs,
Sachs, Shoshana
Benedict
Sachs,
Leah
China
Sachs,
Sachs, Masha Sachs, Rocha Sachs, Tyler Fika Fachler, David Meyer Fachler, Moshe Fachler, Hila Fachler, Scheindel Melechman, Michael Melechman, Theo Melechman, Josef Melechman, Pepi Gorzip, Kaya Melechman, Yoshevet Melechman, Chaim Meyer Melechman, Russen Nut Fachler,
Izzy Fackler, Nathan Fackler, Johanna Carlsberg Sommer, Emil Sommer, Etty Steinberg, Leon Gluck, Wojciech Gluck, Hatzel Abram, Belia Abram, Osiah Joseph Abram, Sigmund Zila Cohn, Ida Cohn, Heinrich
Zimmer,
Herbst, Caroline
Abraham
Herbst,
Humberg,
El Zimmer,
Emma Humberg, Gerda Feist, Fanny Hoffman, Adolf Humberg, Raphael German, Karel German, David German, Hannah Malta Zibner, Rivka Zibner, Baby Zibner, Midla Zibner, Zulem Zibner, Frandla Zibner,
Mendel Kiesner,
daughter of Frandla
Gina
Zibner,
Bela Kiesner,
Shendla Zibner,
Ose
Joseph
Kiesner,
Zibner,
Gina Riva Kiesner, Shifra Kiesner, Rash Kiesner, Yanko Kiesner, Wanda Camerino, Renato Dicori, Italo Camerino, Guya Dicori, Miriam Naftulovichkova, Morik Mosi Jifak Naftulovic, Mayor Naftulovic, Zaidona Naftulovichkova, Hani Moskalovic,
Morit Moskovich,
Chaim Moskovich,
Isidore Moskovich,
Benjamin Moskovich,
Shimshon Hertz, Kyla Hertz, Scheindel Hertz, Avraham Hertz, Rosa Hertz, Josef Hertz, Leib Hertz, Maya Roshofsky, Rachel Roshofsky, Kyla Roshofsky, Hirsch Roshofsky, Roman Paskowski, Kalina Paskowska-Robak, Helena Paskowska,
Luke-Jan Paskowski,
Karolina Paskowska,
Josef Paskowski,
Leocadia Paskowska,
Tadeusz Paskowski, Max Meyer Rothschild, Minnie Fletch Rothschild, William Karl Leopold Rothschild, Grunya Chertkov, Max Kachtov, Mikla Kachtov, Simona Kachtov, Dovra Krashnik, Miriam Krashnik, Henna Krashnik, Vega Krashnik, Annie Ottenwolf, David Galassin,
Sarah Talma,
Jeanette Galassin,
Isaac Shisi,
Paul Tama,
Ephraim Zaks, Lena Zaks, Ada Liesel Israel, Bernard Israel, Liesel Laura Wolf, Ernst Steintal, Lillian Steintal, Max Rothschild, Minnie Rothschild, Wilhelm Rothschild, Max Weiss, Bertha Weiss, Hugo Weiss, Bertha Weiss.
I invite Evelyn Byrne, National Lead on Civic Engagement, to tell us about the anguish of liberation. Youth reader Edward Lee will share words of Primo Levi.
As early as summer of 1944, the Soviets were advancing from the east, liberating and dismantling the Nazi concentration camps, the slave labor camps, the death camps on their way. They first reached Majdanek in July 19th, soon followed by Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka. They reached Auschwitz on the 27th of January 1945, the largest camp and the most notorious killing center of all. Soviet troops continued on to Stutthof, Sachsenhausen, and Ravensbrück as the Americans reached Buchenwald, Dora Mittelbau, Flossenburg, Dachau, and Mauthausen, while the British liberated Neuengamme and Bergen-Belsen in April 1945. The soldiers found 7,600 prisoners barely alive, 836,500 items of women's clothing, 348,800 items of men's clothing, 43,400 pairs of shoes, hundreds of thousands of pairs of spectacles, and 7 tons of human hair. Every item of clothing, each pair of shoes, each pair of spectacles, had once belonged to individual men, women, and children. 6 to 7,000 million displaced persons were liberated by the Allied forces. Despite the difficulties involved in transporting and providing for this mass of humanity in a war-ravaged Europe, the Allies and humanitarians, shocked at the horrific crimes against humanity, worked together to repatriate nearly 6 million people by September of 1945. While most survivors returned to their homes and families, it was not so easy for Jewish survivors who had survived the horrors of the camps. They had lost everything: their families, their homes, their property, their belongings. Most had no one left and no longer had a home to go to. They called themselves Shirit Haplata, the spared remnant. 27th of January, the date when the cataclysmic reality of the Holocaust was revealed as hell on earth, has been designated International Holocaust Remembrance Day by the United Nations, lest we forget. The ashes of those lost in the Holocaust have drifted over Poland and the lands of Europe. They remain in the earth of Europe. They are our past, and it is our solemn duty to carry them into our future.
My number is 174517. We have been baptized. We will carry the tattoo on our left arms until we die. So for us, even the hour of liberty rang out grave and muffled, and filled our souls with joy, and yet also with pain. Nothing could ever happen, good and pure, enough to rub out our past. The scars of the outrage would remain with us forever, in the memories of those who saw it, in the place where it occurred, and in the stories that we shall tell of it.
I invite Perry Ogden to tell us about resistance during the Holocaust.
People often ask, how come Jewish people didn't rebel or resist their Nazi oppressors? Of course they resisted. There were insurrections, revolts, and rebellions in most of the ghettos, concentration camps, and even in the death camps. All of them failed. Throughout the war, there were heroic acts of resistance by individuals, groups, and nations. Armed resistance was undertaken by non-Jewish and Jewish partisan groups, such as the Bielski brothers operating in Belarus, who protected and saved some 1,200 Jews. The partisans fought the Nazis from the forests and peripheral areas of occupied lands. There was spiritual resistance, where Jews risked their lives to maintain their religious observance in the ghettos and the camps. And there were clandestine movements, such as the White Rose Group, led by students Sophie and Hans Scholl, who were ultimately arrested and executed in 1943. Also in 1943, a group of young resistors organized an uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto, which at its peak held some 400,000 inmates. The insurgents lasted 27 days and was doomed to fail. The resistors were killed, and the Germans razed the ghetto to the ground, reporting to Berlin that the former Jewish quarter in Warsaw is no more.
In 1963, Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Remembrance Authority in Israel, inaugurated the award of Righteous Among the Nations to honor non-Jewish people who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. I invite Udo Hogerzel, graphic designer and illustrator, whose aunt Han Hogerzel, together with Dr. Bob Collis, brought 5 Jewish orphans home to Ireland from Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, to tell us about these heroic people.
The righteous come from all walks of life and backgrounds. Individuals, groups of friends, families, all villages, organizations, and diplomats. They were nations such as Denmark, Bulgaria, and Albania, and the bishop and the mayor of the Greek island of Zakynthos, who saved their Jewish communities. There were also righteous Germans, righteous Nazis, righteous Arabs, and righteous Muslims. Priests and nuns throughout occupied Europe risked their lives to provide false documents for Jews, as did diplomats such as Raoul Wallenberg and Semko Sugihara, and many others. Mary Elms is the first Irish person to be awarded the Righteous title. Working with her colleagues in the south of France, they succeeded in saving more than 200 Jewish children from the Nazis. Not only those Jews who have been personally saved by the righteous owe them their lives, but all of their descendants do too.
Originally from Czechoslovakia, Renata has lived in Dublin for over 40 years. When she looks at the faded photograph, she thinks of the members of her family who perished in the Holocaust. I invite Hannah Bloom-Teskey to read Renata's poem.
Someone has survived. I cannot see their faces. I never had a chance. I never met them, but have seen them in the old photograph. There was not time to know what they were really like. I cannot see their faces and what way it was for them, not knowing what happened to their children. I cannot see their faces, their blue eyes and unusual accents, but I have seen it in their child. I cannot see their faces. I cannot imagine the horror that that was it, and that they were going to disappear in the dust over the Polish land. The only reminder is one old photograph, I and the memorial plaque, but no headstone, and no grave because they disappeared in dust. It is so painful to imagine that there was no humanity during that time. I cannot see their faces, but I wish to feel their spirits around to let them know that someone has survived, and the legacy of that time is past and will survive in generations to come. In memory of my Rosenthal grandparents and the 6 million others who perished.
There are thousands of children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren of Holocaust survivors living in the world today. Several live in Ireland, and some of them are here with us this evening. They have grown up with the legacy of the Holocaust in their families. I invite Nicholas Brown to tell us about his grandfather, Joseph Wieselski.
Joe Wieselski was born in Trnava in former Czechoslovakia in 1918. He was a keen sportsman all his life, and as a young man became a high-ranking table tennis player. When Joe was 20 years old, Hitler invaded Czechoslovakia. When he was 24 years old, his parents and his brother were deported to Auschwitz. He joined the resistance and survived the war in the Carpathian Mountains. At war's end in 1945, he had lost both his parents and his brother. After the war, Joe captained the Czechoslovak table tennis team. Life was difficult under the political regime at the time, and with his wife Katerina, he escaped the Prague coup, and he came to Ireland in 1949, where he established his own jewellery business, and in Ireland they had 2 children, Peter and Kate. He made an abiding contribution to Irish life through sport, as captain of the Irish table tennis team for over 20 years, and later as life president of the Irish Table Tennis Association, and through his involvement with Shamrock Rovers and UCD football clubs. In 2007, he was made the commander of the Slovak Order of the White Double Cross for outstanding achievement in sport and for his contribution to the development and maintenance of diplomatic relations between Slovakia and Ireland. He was also decorated with the Order of the Slovak National Uprising. In 2016, he was awarded an honorary degree by Trinity College alongside Professor Peter Higgs, discoverer of the Higgs boson, and J.P. Dunleavy, author of The Ginger Man. Thank you.
I invite Alexandra Peskovska to tell us about her great-grandfather and the genocide of the Roma during the Holocaust.
My great-grandfather, Edward Paszkowski, survived the massacre of 77 Roma in the village of Kharkiv in northern Poland. The remains of the victims were left strewn in a mass grave. No acknowledgement of this atrocity has ever been forthcoming, and here is yet to be a marker and memorial erected on the site. My great-grandmother, Krystyna Paszkowska, survived the Roma ghetto in Sielce, where she met my great-grandfather. They married and they had 7 children. My parents came in Ireland in 1999, and my sister and I were born here. In 2024, we returned to Poland for the 80th anniversary of the genocide of the Roma people during the Holocaust in 1944. This tragedy has eradicated the majority of the Roma population and continues to impact the community in the world, around the world to this day. Thank you very much.
I invite Chief Rabbi Yoni Wieder to tell us about his grandfather.
My grandfather, Ivor Wieder, died just a year ago. He was only 12 when he and his family were deported from their small village in Maramuresh, Transylvania. In 1944, when the Nazis arrived, they were rounded up, shoved into stables, and eventually onto cattle carts on the way to Auschwitz. Within hours of arrival, his mother and younger sister were gassed. Despite his young age, my grandfather was selected for forced labor. He was stripped, shaved, and tattooed with the number A3388, a replacement not just for his name, but for his very humanity. From Auschwitz, he moved through a series of camps, eventually till Bergen-Belsen. Prisoners were transported in open carts in freezing temperatures. Many died, and my grandfather survived by lying underneath the dead bodies. In the camps, he endured starvation, disease, and relentless brutality. He watched as the Nazis maimed their victims, hanged them, and competed by throwing living babies into the air and seeing how many bullets they could fire into their small bodies before they hit the ground. He saw inmates lose all hope, some ending their own lives by throwing themselves on the electric fences, no longer able to bear this hell on earth. And as a teenager, I asked him, "Grandpa, why didn't you do the same thing? Why didn't you just give up?" And he would shake his head and say simply that he didn't know. And people often asked him the same question: what kept him going? Was it faith? Was it hope? Was it the need to bear witness and to the rest of the world? And his answer never changed. He didn't know. He had no grand explanation, no mission, no guiding story. He just kept going. And to him, that was the truest answer. Life itself was reason enough.
I invite Molly Zinn Collis to tell us about her grandfather, Zoltan, and grand-aunt Edith.
My grandfather Zoltan and his sister Edith were very young children when the Zinn family was taken from their home in Slovakia and deported to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Their baby sister did not survive the transport to the camp, and their older brother died shortly after arrival. Their mother survived the conditions until the day Bergen-Belsen was liberated. Dr. Bob Collis, a physician with the Red Cross, found Zoltan and Edith orphaned in the camp. He brought them to Ireland and raised them alongside his own family. Zoltan later added the Collis name to his own, a quiet testament to both loss and kindness, to what had been taken from him and what had been given back. Survivors of the Holocaust often have few surviving relatives and have grown accustomed to having very small families, at least from one side. Those of us who are descendants are often called second or third generation, a title that carries with it an important responsibility: to transmit the memory of the Holocaust to future generations. And yet, remembrance does not exist only in mourning. It also exists in survival. We can rejoice in our own lives, in our families, our children, and our grandchildren. Hitler did not win. One or more of our parents or grandparents survived. And because of that, we are here, living our lives and looking towards the future.
I invite Yoram Takar to tell us about his great-aunt, his uncle, and cousins in France.
After securing the agreement of the Vichy government, German officials and French police worked together conducting roundups of Jews in both the occupied and unoccupied zones of France. In Paris, Adolf Eichmann began a program of isolating French Jews, first registering them, then placing them under curfew, forcing them to wear yellow stars of David, and banning them from public places. Some 28,000 foreign Jewish refugees were imprisoned in camps where the able-bodied were drafted for slave labor. In 1941, the transit camp at Drancy was set up in a suburb of Paris in preparation of deportation to the east. Designed to hold 700 persons, at its peak, Drancy held 7,000. As deportations increased, an infamous roundup took place in Paris on the 16th and 17th of July 1942. 12,884 Jewish men and women, including 4,051 children, were brought to the Vélodrome d'Hiver, an indoor stadium in Paris. The Jews were kept there for 5 days under deplorable conditions, poor ventilations, little food, water, or sanitary facilities. Parisians nearby could hear the wailing of the internees day and night. Eventually, they were transferred to Drancy, where the children were separated from their parents, who were deported to Auschwitz. Many of the children stayed for several weeks in Drancy, where large numbers of them died from lack of care. Finally, they too were sent directly to Auschwitz, where most of them were gassed on arrival. Only 811 Jews survived the roundup of La Grande Rafle. My family was torn apart by La Rafle du Vélodrome d'Hiver. My grandmother's brother and sister, David and Janet, who were 29 and 19 years old, were visiting their uncle Paul and Aunt Talma in Paris. They were amongst the Jewish citizens rounded up during La Rafle. Great-uncle David died in Drancy transit camp. Paul and Sarah, along with my grand-aunt Janet, were sent from Drancy to Auschwitz. Their lives ended in the gas chamber in August 1942.
I invite Karina Camerino to tell us about her grandfather, Enzo.
As a third-generation survivor, I sometimes think of how unlikely it is that I exist at all. All 4 of my grandparents are survivors of the Holocaust. My Romanian grandfather was a prisoner in a work camp until he escaped. My French grandmother was hidden in the countryside with her family and escaped arrest because the entire village conspired to protect them, warning them and hiding them behind a false wall built into a barn whenever soldiers were nearby. My Italian grandmother's family was tipped off by a police commissioner to be out of town on the day the SS rounded up the Jews of Rome on the 16th of October, 1943. My Italian grandfather's family was arrested that day and deported to Auschwitz. Of the 1,022 people who were rounded up on the 16th of October, 1943, only 16 people survived. My grandfather, Enzo, was one of the survivors. After the war, he made it back to Italy and eventually to Canada, where he married and raised his family. He named his son Italo and his daughter Giulia after his own father and mother, who were murdered in Auschwitz. All of my grandparents have died now, and I feel responsible to speak out about the Holocaust and anti-Semitism. I can't forget the danger of people harming other people hasn't gone away. This history is not that long ago. I'm raising my son, a fourth-generation survivor, to be proud of his culture, his religion, and his family history. We exist because my grandparents survived.
Dr. Bob Collis worked as a volunteer doctor in the former Bergen-Belsen concentration camp immediately after the war. He brought 5 Jewish orphans back with him to Ireland. Among those children were brother and sister Terry and Susie Mullen, who Bob arranged to have adopted by a Jewish couple, Willie and Elsie Samuels. I invite Susie Diamond, who is the last survivor of that group of children brought to Ireland by Bob Collis in 1947, to tell us her story.
I was born Susie Molnar in the town of Kozak in Hungary in 1942. We were a small family comprising my mother Gazela, my father Sandor, my brother Terry, and myself. In 1942, my father was forcefully conscripted into the slave labor service of the Hungarian army and deported to the Soviet Union, where he perished in 1943. Between July and September 1944, in just 8 weeks, Adolf Eichmann organized and rounded up and deported to deportation of nearly 500,000 Hungarian Jews. They were sent directly to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where most of them perished in the gas chambers. During these weeks, the Gestapo came for my mother, brother, and me. We were deported first to Ravensbrück and then to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. My mother died shortly after liberation. Terry and I were very young children when we came to Ireland. We grew up believing we were the only 2 members of our family to have survived. In 2007, Terry passed away, and I was the only one left. But things changed in 2015 when I was discovered by a first cousin still living in Kozak, and I learned a little about my family. My father was one of 4 brothers who ran a timber business. 2 of them perished in the Holocaust, and 2 survived. I have also learned that I have first cousins living in Hungary and in the United States. I have a family. I have visited Kozak and seen my grandfather's house, the Jewish cemetery where my grandparents are buried, and the synagogue where all my family prayed. 778 Jews lived in Kozak before the war. 461 of them were murdered in the Holocaust. Most important to me is the memorial scroll on the synagogue wall, recording the Jews from Kozak who perished in the Holocaust. My family is listed on this scroll, but this has to be corrected because my brother and I were not murdered, we survived. Today, I am mindful that time is passing too quickly for my contemporaries and for me. What we experienced took place in the middle of the last century, far too distant for young people today to understand the enormity of what happened. 6 million Jews murdered because of their faith, more than the population of Ireland. I urge young people to speak out about hate speech, about bullying, and about Holocaust denial. I applaud them to tell our story and to keep the memory of the Holocaust alive.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for 1 minute's silence as we remember all of the victims of the Holocaust. Thank you. It is customary at Holocaust Memorial events to light 6 candles in the memory of 6 million Jewish people who perished in the Shoah. In Ireland, we also light candles in memory of all the victims of the Holocaust. In memory of thousands of people with disabilities and disabling conditions who were murdered, forcibly sterilized, and starved to death by doctors and other willing helpers, I invite Carolyn Akintola and Gary Carney of the Disability Federation of Ireland to light their candles. We will always remember. In memory of the genocide of the Roma, which took place during the Holocaust, when more than 250,000 Roma and Sinti people were rounded up and murdered, displaced, and forcibly sterilized by the Nazis, I invite Jessica and Christian Simonich of the Roman community to light their candles. We will always remember. In memory of ethnic minorities, mixed race, Poles, and other Slavic peoples who were murdered, displaced, forcibly Aryanized, and incarcerated in concentration camps, I invite Louisa Rack from Poland, whose Jewish grandmother was a young girl when she was saved by a Polish Catholic family during the Holocaust, and Dr. Iban Joseph, director of the Institute of Anti-Racism and Black Studies, to light their candles. We will always remember. In memory of the thousands of gay men and women who were imprisoned in concentration camps, where they were subjected to harder work, less food, and greater brutality than other inmates. Thousands were murdered. I invite Anna Nolan of the National LGBT Federation and Matthew Haywood Cunliffe of Holocaust Education Ireland to light their candles. We will always remember. In memory of the political victims of the Holocaust, communists, socialists, trade unionists, and political opponents of the Nazi regime who were persecuted and murdered, I invite David Joyce, Irish Congress of Trade Unions, and Barry Andrews, MEP, to light their candles. We will always remember. In memory of the Christian victims of all denominations who were persecuted and murdered by the Nazis, I invite Sheila Schlegel and Terry McParland to light their candles. we will always remember. 6 candles are dedicated to the memory of the 6 million Jewish people, including 1.5 million children who were annihilated in the Holocaust. Jews were murdered in concentration camps, labor camps, and death camps. Jews perished in the ghettos. Jews died of starvation and disease. Jews were shot in the forest and in their villages, and Jews were murdered in the streets and in their homes. Those lighting candles in memories of the Jewish victims of the Holocaust are children, grandchildren, or great-grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. All of them lost countless members of their families in the Holocaust. Caroline Zinn Collis, whose father Zoltan Zinn and great-aunt Edith survived Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, but whose parents and other family members perished in the Holocaust. Amy Dawson, whose grandmother Jana and grand-aunt Frina survived the massacre of the Jews of Debritsky Yar, but whose entire family and community perished in the Holocaust. Jeff Leo Callan, whose grandmother's cousin Johanna Karlsberg was deported from Bad Homburg, Germany in 1942 with her husband Emil Kurt Zummer, as well as many other members of the Jewish community who perished in the Holocaust. Lana Kaminsky Knight, whose grandfather Jan Kaminsky escaped the massacre in his native village of Bilgoraj in Poland, where his parents, Mindla and Zulin, and his 2 sisters, Hannah and Rivka, baby brother, and other family members, all perished in the Holocaust. Joe Katz, whose mother, Frida, survived Auschwitz, but whose many family members perished in the Holocaust. Ria Cherniak-Lebov, whose grandfather, Harry Cherniak, escaped from Poland shortly before the war. His wife, Bluma, and their children, Jada and Frida, who had been hiding in Antwerp, were murdered in Auschwitz, along with many of Harry's extended family who perished in the Holocaust. We will always remember. As our ceremony draws to a close, Chief Rabbi Yoni Wieder and Carl Nelken of the Irish Jewish community will recite the memorial prayer. May I ask you to please stand.
God of mercy, who dwells on high, grant proper rest on the sheltering wings of your divine presence among the holy and the pure, who shine like the brightness of the firmament, for the souls of all the innocent who are killed, murdered, slaughtered, burned, drowned, strangled, and buried alive at the hands of the Nazi oppressors. In Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, Majdanek, Sobibor, Treblinka, and other concentration and extermination camps in Europe. We pray for their souls. May their resting place be in the Garden of Eden. May the Master of Mercy shelter them for eternity in the shadow of his wings. And may he bind their souls in the bond of life. May the Lord be their heritage. May they repose in peace in their resting places. And let us say, Amen.
El Molei Rachamim, Shochen Bamramim, Hamesei Menucha Nechona, Al Kanfei Hashchino, B'ma'alos Kedoshim Utaharim, Kizohar Orokia, Masirim, Es Nishmos, Achenu B'nei Yisrael, HaKadoshim HaTaharim, Shenoflu B'dei HaRotzchim, V'nishpach Damam, Ba'Auschwitz, Majdanek, Treblinka, U'bishar Machanos Hashmad B'Europa, Shenehegu, Shenishchatu, Veshenishrefu, Veshenitbiu, Veshenechnu al Kiddush Hashem, Bavur Shekol HaKol HaKadosh Hazeh, Mispalelim Biadas Koras Nishmosam, Megan Eden Teye Menuchosom, Lochen Bala Rachamim, Yashtirei Mesei Shekinofecho Leyolamim, Hutzeror B'Yisror HaChaim Es Nishmosam, Adonai hu nachalosom, v'yanuchu al mishkavosam v'shalom, v'nomar
Please be seated. Professor Thomas O'Dowd will give his closing remarks.
It was the survivors themselves who first acknowledged that their responsibility for passing on knowledge of the Holocaust and keeping its memory alive. For this reason, it is essential to teach about the Shoah whether there are Jews in your respective countries or not, whether there are many or few or none left. The Shoah should never be diluted, never denied, distorted, or trivialized. Our generation and the generation or two after us will be the last that will be able to say that we stood and shook the hands of some of those who survived. Go home from this place and tell your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren that today you looked into the eyes that witnessed the most cataclysmic events ever unleashed by mankind upon mankind. Tell them that you met people who will be remembered and still talked about and still wept over 1,000 years from now. The Holocaust happened, and it can happen again. And every one of us has a solemn duty to ensure that nothing like it ever occurs again.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us in this evening of solemn commemoration.